trip there was 1973.
So your first trip was when?
1973.
1973. So William has been going to India for quite a while, and he definitely has a feel, um, a feel for India. As I was saying, he has some incredible videotapes of children playing the street. One of my favorite videos was just a group of people boarding a little boat to go on a boat ride. And it was just captured the feel of what India was like. So when William told me he had written a book, which is right over here, I have it on the screen. It's called Mark Twain in India by William H. Bonney. I suggested, well, could you do a program? And he said, sure, I'd be glad to do it. On the chat room, there's a URL where you can go to the website to find the book if you would like to purchase one. And that will be available to you at any time. So the format will be that William will introduce himself in the way that he wants and tell us a little bit about his interest in Mark Twain and how he took Mark Twain in India, put those two things together. All the photographs of India from his book, which you'll be showing some of them, were taken by William. And he does have some Library of Congress videos that were actually taken by Mark Twain. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to William. He'll do his show. His presentation will be about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll see. And then when that's done, we'll have a chance to talk to him and ask some questions and kind of get to know him better. Okay, William?
Thanks, Sandy. And
Sure.
Also thank you to Amherst Neighbors for having me here today. Really enjoy it, talking to people about this book. So as you mentioned, I've been to India at least 10 times over the years. I first went there as a college undergraduate with a backpack in 1973. And it was kind of scary, kind of different, and very enthralling. And that's probably why I kept returning. And then a few years ago, decades ago, actually, I was reading Mark Twain's book, Following the Equator. Now, as you might or might not know, Mark Twain not only wrote novels about things like Joan of Arc, Prince and a Pauper, and a young man and slave who were on a raft on the Mississippi River, but he also was pretty well known for his travelogues. He used to travel all over the world and he'd write these books and people would buy them. They were very interested in all these exotic places he went. He also occasionally did a lecture. Those were the days when you could fill a lecture hall with somebody talking about many different things. In this case, he was, of course, talking about, he was doing a comedy show, really. He would recite or speak from memory some of the passages from his books, and he could fill a lecture hall pretty easily anytime he wanted to. And he wanted to because the money was good. Twain, in his day, was probably the most successful author. He was J.K. Rowling of his day. I mean, he was Stephen King and everybody else put together all over the world. The whole English-speaking world knew him very well. And so he had humble origins in Hannibal, Missouri, but he went out west. That was one of his first books, was Roughing It. And he went to the Western United States, which was kind of frontier land in those days, because he wanted to work with his brother. I think it was a silver mine he had in mind, and he was investing in that. He went out to work on this silver mine project and hopefully get rich. Well, he got broke. He was not much at investing his money. So he wrote little articles for the local papers. They swallowed those up. They're very popular. And of course, he wrote the novels that we're all familiar with and did pretty well, and bought a beautiful house in Hartford, Connecticut that you're probably familiar with. Prior to that, he lived in Elmira, New York, having married a woman named Olivia, who was a well-known, kind of an activist and a liberal, and from a very well-known family in Elmira, well-to-do as well. So They moved into the Connecticut house. Twain kept on with his bad investments, kept wasting, really in modern terms would be millions of dollars, just through it. I mean, one of his investments was what was called the Page typesetter, and this was this incredibly complicated machine. He figured he could, if it could be made possible just to type things in on this keyboard thing, and it would set the type in the book, you could avoid all the middlemen, which were in those days mainly young men actually who had good eyesight, who could put that tiny, teeny type, those individual pieces of metal type, into a composing stick, they called it. And the composing stick would be built into a page. That would be a galley that would go on a press, and they'd print it, and very tedious. So Page came up with a machine that he said could, Twain could just type in his words and they could be turned into book pages. Well, that cost millions. It still exists. It's interesting to see. If you go visit the Hartford House in Connecticut, it is interesting to see that Page typesetter, because to my eye, it looks almost like a Linotype setter, which is a machine that did take over the world. He was just a few years early. It was too complicated. It broke down. He lost a fortune. My first job was working at a printing house in Jamaica Plain. And that's why I got interested in types and typefaces. I did the design of this whole book, which we now do digitally. But in that typesetting place in Jamaica Plain, they actually had a typesetter, because it was only recently obsolete. And so, you know, it's funny to think that Twain was just a little ahead of his time, and that's a good way to lose a fortune, and he did. So now he's broke. The bankruptcy is about to devour his entire estate. He had friends. He had a millionaire friend named H.H. Rogers, a very close friend, very dear friend, who helped him try to get his affairs together. Twain wanted to sell, he's pretty old by now, maybe 60. He wanted to sell all the copyrights of all his books, and Rogers is going, no. That Rogers, the millionaire, understood that you have an asset that's bringing money in, you let it continue to bring money in. So he kept the copyrights on his book. Rogers sort of took over the financial aspects of Twain's estate, what was left of it. And Twain and his publicist cooked up this idea of a worldwide tour, a comedy tour. He would go to different points, circumnavigate the globe, and have these profitable lectures at all these different spots all around the world. Ultimately, he would return and write a book about his travels that became Following the Equator, and that's what he did. So he went across the United States, then he went to Canada, then he went to Hawaii, and there was a situation there that we would all be familiar with. He was supposed to speak in Hawaii, but there was an epidemic. He couldn't get off the ship. They were doing social isolation there in Hawaii. He went to then he went to other places, other parts of the English-speaking world, Australia, New Zealand, and then he went to India. So this book is an excerpt of the India section of Following the Equator, which he, by the way, Twain considered one of his finest works. It is really a good read. And I remember when I was reading it, every page, page after page, paragraph after paragraph, I would see something in there. And even though Twain was talking about something that had happened 100 years or so prior to my visit, I could immediately recognize that is the same thing Twain was talking about. Maybe kind of transmogrified for the 21st or the 20th century, but clearly a continuum of what he was talking about. And I started taking pictures. I made it a project and went back to India a number of times, largely for the purpose of getting pictures of quotes from Twain. I walked around with a little notebook with Twain quotes that could easily be illustrated by photographs if I could just find that subject that, you know, I knew was there somewhere. So ultimately, when the pandemic happened, I was able to put the book together and put all the photographs in and design it in Adobe InDesign and get it published. Now, you might be interested what went on in the end with Twain. The comedy tour was a smash hit. It was 1896 that he arrived in India. By the time he got to London and Paris to write it up, he'd made a lot of money. He actually succeeded in recovering his estate. And when he died, there was quite a bit of money left. So this is different from our days. He wouldn't have had to pay that back. He could have declared bankruptcy, but he and his wife, Olivia, just thought that was morally wrong. And so he went to this tremendous effort to write this book that turned into Following the Equator. And that's what you read in Mark Twain in India, the book I published. Now, the setup of the book is that it has the text of Twain, but it's interspersed with pictures, each of which has a quote from the book, which to my mind illustrates the quote. So I'm going to show you a few of those quotes for the rest of the talk, and along with the pictures that they accompany, and you can see what I mean. How Twain's words are easily illustrated with modern photographs. So for starters, it should be known that he loved India. He was enthralled. I'm going to share the screen with a quote that's from the book. This is just not literary posing. Can you see that? It says, India, land of dreams and romance, of fabulous wealth, fabulous poverty, of splendor and rags, of palaces and hovels, of pestilence, of genii and giants and Aladdin lamps, and on and on. 100 tongues, 1,000 religions, 2 million gods, cradle of the human race, birthplace of human speech, mother of history, grandmother of legend, great grandmother of tradition, whose yesterday's bare date with the molding antiquities of the rest of the nations. And he says, the one land that all men desire to see and haven't seen it once, even by a glimpse, would not give that glimpse for the shows of all the rest of the globe combined. Okay, it's rare for Twain to be that over the top, but he sure was. That was exactly the way he thought about it. Here's daughter Clara, who traveled in India with him, along with wife Olivia and his publicist, who set up all these tours in all these exotic places. His name was Carlisle Smythe. And he just kept reiterating, this wonderful land, this marvelous land. There can be no other like it. There he is on shipboard. You can see, of course, Sam Twain was a riverboat captain. So he loved doing all this traveling by ship. Obviously, in those days, a huge fraction of this world tour was on shipboard. He had luxury cabins, and he liked that interval for writing and for meditating, and of course for socializing, smoking cigars, drinking hot whiskey, and playing pool and so forth. Okay, I open the book with a quote: there are 2 times in a man's life when he should not speculate, when he can't afford it and when he can. So that pretty much says why he was on that world tour. Towards sunset. Okay, so he arrives in Bombay on January 20th, 1896. When you arrive in Bombay, as I did, you drive around Malabar Point, the seashore. That's Malabar Point. That's the seashore, just as he saw it. Maybe the buildings are newer, but Bombay is a beach city. There's a wonderful city beach called Chapati Beach, and you go there and you feel it's very much like what you read about in Twain's book. You go around. This is Malabar Hill in the background. There's a sunset. All colors. That's another impression when you first arrive in India, is the incredible colors everywhere. They have a holiday in India called Holi, and Holi is the festival of color. And on Holi, you wear old clothes, because what's going to happen is people buy these, they just call them colors. I guess it's chalk, but you have a few pockets full of these, and everybody is walking down the street, throwing clouds of color on other people, on the dogs, on the elephants, if there are some. And it's just the most joyous eruption of incredible colors you've ever seen. Twain was also sort of obsessed with the crow. I never saw such a bird for delivering opinions. If I sat on one end of the balcony, the crows would gather on the other railing at the other end and talk about me. And they are everywhere. How is that? Do you like my Missouri accent, my fake accent? Sound like Twain? Okay, so that's the Indian crow stealing some grapes from a place I was staying. They are very bold and they are everywhere. Closing up on Bombay. So he traveled first to Bombay. There's Bombay Harbor, looking at the Arabian Sea, just as Twain saw it. And then he talks about the great god Vishnu, who has 108 names. And you do see this in all the temples. That one is from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts of Vishnu, but like Twain said, he has 108 names, 108 special ones, just for Sunday use only, etc. He was slightly sacrilegious, but I don't think anybody really cared. So this is Vishnu. And it's true in India, you travel around and you just see images and statues and engravings and paintings and temples to the gods everywhere. There's no particular Sabbath. They go to the temple anytime they feel like. And for a lot of people, that's pretty often. This quote, okay, it's not exactly the same anymore. Sometimes even the public carriages have this superabundant crew, slightly modified, one to drive, one to sit by and see it is done, and one to stand up behind and yell. Yell when there's anybody in the way, and for practice when there isn't. So this is the most superfluous sign in India. It shows the back of a truck. It says blow horn. Well, you don't need to say. In India, the ear-splitting traffic is just like Twain must have encountered it. They didn't have horns in those days, with Twain's days, but they did have people to stand in the carriage and shout to clear the traffic. It was immediately recognizable what he was talking about, just transposed to the motor age now. Here's another carriage, somebody who drives a carriage in Bombay. And there's another horn, please. No, you don't have to ask. There will be a lot of horns. The back of the trucks, by the way, are beautiful and decorated everywhere in India. It's good photographic source material. Its stupendous population consists of farm laborers. It's one vast farm, almost one vast stretch of fields. It still seems that way today. A large fraction of the population is more in cities than it was even the first time I went to India in 73. It was probably 80% rural farmland like this. Today, it may be closer to 50% rural or less even in that short a time. However, you get in a train and you're traveling across India and you just don't know when the farms are going to end. It just goes on and on and on, village after village, field after field, bullock after bullock with plow after plow. It's one vast farm. I observed much the same thing. Okay, and this is a sight you see, a woman carrying a jug of water on her head. Loose silver rings on her ankles, her arms. There they are, bunched anklets, fantastic jewelry. There's some showy women in Rajasthan with anklets, bracelets, rings in their nose, and as we said before, a superabundance of color. I love those clothes. I wish the guys could wear that. I would have liked to have been able to dress up like that in India, but the men dress a lot more sedately. What cannot happen in India? Well, here's something I didn't think could happen, but it happened. There in Calcutta, there is a robot, and you can pay the guy a small amount, put on those headphones you see there, and the robot will tell your fortune. That's one way of learning the future. They have crystal balls and other methods too, but I wasn't expecting to see a robot. Fortune-telling robot. What can't happen? Okay, now here's about winding a turbine. And again, I think this must have, maybe Twain met the same guy, except it was 100 years earlier. He was not able to learn how to wind a turbine. It seemed a simple art and easy, but that's a deception. It's a thin, delicate stuff, a foot or more wide, 50 feet long, winds it in a minute or two. There it is. And there's a guy, it goes clockwise from the top. A gentleman I met in Rajasthan, and he shows me exactly as Twain described it. I timed this. It was 1 minute and 3 seconds. One piece of cloth, wind it, go around clockwise, round, over, up, through, round, twist, snug, whoop, whoop. And there it is, snug as a mold. It's amazing how they do that. He's talking about a little girl he met in Bombay, Malabar Hill. A wee brown sprite, very pretty, very serious, very winning, delicately molded, a dear little fairyland princess. This could be anywhere, but you see those delicate and serious girls. There's a good example. If he talks about well, okay, if you're an Indian prince, of course, you're in danger of your food being poisoned and you have a taster, but he says, I would eat with the cook. And here's you know what this is? This is a celebrity chef. It's a cooking show on TV somewhere in India. The Jain temple. Now, in India, the Jains are a separate religion from Hindus. Sometimes they consider themselves Hindus, sometimes they don't. But it's an extremely purified form of Hinduism, where they have a number of prophets that they worship, and some of them are extremely austere. Not only vegetarians, but a devout Jain will not eat anything that has been, even if it's a plant, if it's come out of the ground, because that would kill it, like an onion would kill the plant. So they are supposed to eat nuts, berries, and fruits and things like that, just in order to not kill the plant, if you can believe that. Some of the Jains are even naked. They call them sky-clad Jains. They wear the sky. And it's surprising to see that, but they're occasionally Jains walking around completely naked. One of them addressed Parliament a few years ago, and people are, you know, the other parliamentarians are trying to, I don't know what, keep a straight face, not look directly at him, but he had some issue and they had to let him. They respect, more than anything, they respect religion in India. Rickshaw athletes, yeah, they still are there. There's a pretty fancy hotel and a guy riding a bike there. It's a great way of getting around. It's a great way of putting a few rupees in the hands of somebody who probably doesn't have much. And boy, are these guys in shape. This guy looks like an older gentleman. Some of them really do look like just the most muscular and sinewy characters you ever met. And the rickshaws, again, I think they're probably pretty darn similar. So there it is, place after place, image after image, is a lot like the way Mark Twain described it in Following the Equator. Okay, now this is a Jain idol. These aren't in any particular order, so we're back to Jains again. A person who's become a saint or a god through accessions of steadily augmenting holiness acquired through a series of reincarnations and promotions extending over many ages. And so this is a Jain saint. You see these in the Jain temples. There's a set number of them, and they always have these wide open eyes. It's quite a distinctive kind of a look, quite different from Hinduism, even though they did come from the same source. Shops are but sheds. They still are but sheds. Here's a green grocer with a shed, and these can just line the streets for miles. And you know, it's a lot of fun to go there and check out your vegetables and fruit. Probably quite a bit fresher and more organic than what you get at Whole Foods. And I love the balance scales. And as you can see in the background, no shed is complete without plenty of pictures of gods and goddesses to adorn it. There's some more. Yeah, these can go on for many hundreds of feet or even miles. Sheds of shops selling everything. Looks like I see nuts, I see fruit, I see vegetables. It appears to be rope, both plastic and the traditional jute rope there, it looks like. And beyond that, who knows, probably tobacco bags, on and on. Okay, now here's something else that goes back to Twain's day, but reminds me of present day as well. He and the bride were to entertain company every night. This is just before a wedding. They're huge affairs, as you know, in India, weddings are. He and the bride were to entertain company every night and nearly all night for a week or more, then get married if alive. Both the children were a little elderly, as brides and grooms go in India, 12. They ought to have been married a year or two sooner. Still, to a stranger, 12 seems young enough. And there's a photo of a bride and groom and a family photo. Now, I actually did see brides who were that age or betrothed girls. It's illegal to get married at that young an age. Maybe 22 or 23 for girls is the legal age, and a little younger for boys. I'm not sure exactly what the law is, and it's not all that important because it's ignored as often as it's observed, that law. But I should say, if it's a 12-year-old or even younger, some girls are married before they're born, when they're still fetuses. A pregnant woman and a family nearby maybe they're pregnant with a boy, they already agree about the marriage. So it's not exactly true that the bride and groom are married at age 12. They would quite likely not even meet each other until they're a more reasonable age, like 18 or 20 or 25. But in these days, there it is. That's truly a wedding portrait. And to my eye, they look a lot less than 22 or 23 years old. Special in the home of forgery. Some particular districts noted as marts for the finest specimens of the forger's hand. Here's some fake Rolexes in Mumbai, a particular neighborhood on Kalaba Causeway is the name of the road. And yeah, you can get some really good fake software, fake watches, fake anything. Yeah, this is just a quote that I love. There's only one India. It is the only country that has a monopoly of grand and imposing specialties. Another country has a remarkable thing. It cannot have it all to itself. Some other country has a duplicate, but India, oh, that is different. Its marvels are its own. The patents cannot be infringed. Imitations are not possible. And to think of the size of them, the majesty of them, the weird and outlandish character of most of them. The car of the juggernaut. You've heard of a juggernaut. Today, that mainly means an unstoppable force. You know, his Senate race is a juggernaut rolling over all others. Well, this is an actual juggernaut. Krishna had a juggernaut. It would roll over, the devotees that would throw themselves under the wheels of this giant chariot, and thus be assured of instant access to heaven. In this case, it was a big ceremony where the juggernaut would be pulled down the street by devotees. It's on wheels, and there are people inside, and it must weigh many, many tons. There they are again. I noticed there's somebody right there I recognize. You recognize that person, Sandy? Helping to pull the rope. And then there are, of course, the whole town comes out and does this for days.
He does look somewhat familiar.
That guy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. He talked about the granite mountains that had dozens of vast temples, made them glorious with sculptured colonnades. Now, this particular place is in, this one is in Lenovo, India, but there are some famous cave temples in Ellora, India. These are some kids playing volleyball. But if you go into these caves, there are literally temples carved out. So what they did, to put it one way, is that they removed everything that wasn't the temple. So inside, they're great sculptures of Buddha or of Hindu gods, and elaborate carvings in the walls, and sometimes paintings. So where there's a granite outcrop, they spent certainly hundreds of years removing the granite and leaving in place a temple, a cave temple. Fortresses of such magnitude that the show strongholds of the rest of the world are but modest things by comparison. This would be Kumbhalgarh, a great fort in Rajasthan, India. And it is many, many acres in size. It has a wall that you can probably see the wall extending on both sides, and it surrounds well, the walls are 22 miles. It was built in 1458, and it has never been breached. That fort, since 1458 up until the present, and up until World War II, it was still used as a fort. Now it's more, it has villages, it has people inside, it has hundreds of temples inside. But there have been many, many invaders over the years. They've never gotten inside of that thing. 2 million gods and worships in all. In religion, all other countries are paupers. India is the only millionaire. And you've probably noticed, in these pictures of India, or if you've ever been there as you walk through India, the gods are everywhere. This is a screensaver in Patna. I just walked by the god. Let's see, I can even tell you that's okay. I see Durga, Ganesh, Hanuman, Durga again, Shiva, Durga again, Shiva and Parvati, and well, anyway, 2 million gods, most of them on view all the time. Now, Twain traveled by train through India, and he and his party, Smythe, the publicist, his wife, Livy, and his daughter, Clara, and maybe a few other people's in the party, they went from Bombay to Delhi, to Calcutta, to Darjeeling, to back to the west part of India again. In all, it was several tens of thousands, a couple of thousand, and I think maybe a couple tens of thousands of miles by train. So they were well-appointed cars, and there was quite a crush of people, as there still is, in the third class or the unair conditioned or just general class cars. Many classes of cars. This is India. The caste system exists in the form of the different classes on the trains. And he loved looking at the stations, Twain did, with these masses of crowds, washes of tides of crowds. Here's a picture of Jodhpur in a train. It's just like this. A train pulls up, this tidal wave of colors and people, confused, bewildered, anxious, eager to get on with it, just endlessly moving out through the station, out to the streets. Train moves away, another train moves in, and another tide of people flows in. It is sort of fun to watch. An Indian well. Now he describes it. This was back in 1896. Oxen tramping leisurely up and down long inclines, drawing water. And out of the stillness came the suffering screech of machinery. Okay. Well, this was not that long ago. There's a well, there's the oxen, there's the machinery, and they were going back and forth. They'd pull up the buckets and then go back down. And I got as close as I dared and looked down there, or sort of I didn't want to fall in, but I am pretty sure there were people down there somehow doing the work and loading the buckets with water. while all day the oxen went back and forth, drawing the water up to irrigate the fields. Today, they'd prefer a nice electric pump, but still, as you see, there's plenty of what Twain saw that still exists in India. Yeah, there's a closer look at it. Here's the inside of a cave temple. These are stupas to Buddha. This one happens to be a Buddhist temple, cave temple. A string of stately camels, always interesting things to look at. Velvet shod by nature. And so you look at this quote, if you're just reading the book, you say, what do you mean a string and velvet shod? But then you get to India, and by God, there they are. They're in strings walking by. Their feet, they do look like they have velvet shoes on. And quite a picturesque thing. So, a mahout is an elephant driver, an elephant tamer. And he speaks to the elephant in a low voice, and the elephant seems to understand it. There's a mahout it's actually a mahout training ground. I was very lucky to get invited to go there. And yeah, you look at that, and it's sort of like what Twain said. The mahout looks like he's in charge. The elephant looks ready to receive instructions. And the howdah is what you ride an elephant on, made of silver. That one's made of silver. Okay, now this one I really like, because what he says is, this was when Twain arrived in some city, and they messed up, and he went to see the new palace instead of the old palace. He was on a schedule. He had to do his lectures, and he made a note. By mistake, we were taken to see the new palace instead. We used up the last remnant of our spare time there, and it was a pity, for the new palace is mixed modern American European and has not a merit except costliness. Here is the most expensive dwelling in the world, built recently in Mumbai. The only exception is Buckingham Palace, but this was built by a family of billionaires. It is a house to 6 people. Has not a merit, it has a merit of costliness. I could say that, but to me, it doesn't fit in much with the rest of the environment. I'm going to cut off pretty soon for the purpose of taking questions and chat comments, but I'll just go through a few quick slides. These are Kali or Bonney, the goddess who accepts sacrifices. In Twain's day, or at least according to what he was told, they were accepting lots of human sacrifices. Here is a butcher who is certainly a Muslim, because Hindus are not allowed, at least traditional and observant ones aren't supposed to handle meat. There is another temple to that goddess we just saw, Kali. These are yokes where they put the goats in and cut the goat's head off, sacrifice it, and send the goat to its next life, probably a better one after having been sacrificed in such a auspicious place as the Kalighat temple in Calcutta. The face and bearing of a holy man, or of a person. He says that, Twain says that there may be disagreeable people, but they're in the minority. This is in the state of Bihar, in the city of Varanasi, or Benares, as Twain called it. There's another guy in the same general location. The most interesting people in the world. Okay, this is an interesting person. This is these people have existed for hundreds, thousands of years, I don't know, but it's a special caste or tribe. And these are Hijdas, who are either intersex or castrated and live their life as women. I think you can tell that's actually not a woman under that sari, but they do. You see them in train stations and they annoy people. You pretty much they're begging for money. You pretty much got to give them money or they'll make your life miserable. That's their gig. And they're kind of little known, even in India, what goes on in the Hijda community, but you do see them around occasionally. A white turban, as he said. Battered little temple. There's a temple and the temple priest. Low tide of a river. Twain, to him, it suggested the musculature of a human, like sinews and tissue, and you can kind of see that in this picture. I can sort of see what he was talking about. And then Saharas of sand crossing the. This is the Ganges River at low tide. He calls it low tide, but at when it's quite dry, and there's just enormous bridges. This one's under construction, but even in those days, there were long bridges, and much of the time it was just a sandy riverbed. And there's a pilgrim arriving at Varanasi to wash his sins away. There's a fakir in plenty. He says fakirs in plenty with cow dung covering their hair because the cow is holy and so is the rest of it. And they're covered with ash, and they do live an extremely austere life, going from place to place. This is a sadhu, or a holy man, who pretty much renounced everything, every worldly possession, and travels from place to place in India. Crowds were bathing. This is the Ganges. The crowds are bathing again in the river. And men with bathing in the river, he said their muscles were like eggs knotted under their skin. There's some athletic guys at the Ganges. That is what he said. Okay, Twain was talking about the durian. He says, by all accounts, it was the most strange fruit, incomparably delicious to the taste, but not to the smell. Its rind was said to exude a stench so atrocious a nature, that when the durian was in the room, even the presence of a polecat was a refreshment. So there aren't too many of those. This happens to me in Thailand. Twain never actually saw one, but I can guarantee you he was absolutely correct about the smell. Okay, and again, we're in Varanasi. I'm going to let it go now, if you think it's time, Sandy, and open the floor up to people to talk or to ask questions or to give comments.
Okay, so you can stop sharing your screen. I do have a question that I'd like to start off with.
Yes.
I've talked to a number of people who've gone to India, and they said there was always an adjustment period because, as your photos show, it is so different in those scenes of, almost seems like chaos of those thousands of people and all that noise, so different than what we're used to. I was wondering what your adjustment was like, or your thoughts about the kind of the general tenor of what was going on.
Well, as I said, the first time I went to India, it was 73. I was 21 years old, college student who'd never seen much outside of the suburbs of Syracuse, New York. And I will freely say I was in a state of shock. I couldn't handle it. It was too much. And I didn't really have that good a time. But how long till I adjusted? That was 11 years. I read up, studied India, learned everything I could, met Indians, had an itinerary the second time instead of just bumming around and staying at flop houses. And the second time, with that knowledge and sort of being ready, it was a much quicker adjustment. There is culture shock, of course, but second time I went to India, it was quite a pleasant trip. I would say most people who go to India, the first few days are pretty bad. I mean, it depends. I mean, some people go and they're in luxury hotels and they don't even get, I tell people it's inevitable that you're going to get sick. You're going to get deli belly. You're going to get some gastric disorder. You're going to see poverty that will shock you to your soul. However, I've talked on rare occasions, talked to people, none of that happened. And I can only conclude they went on some kind of tour. We're staying at $100 a night hotels and getting, transported around to the sites without, to the architectural sites and so forth, without actually having to endure it. But I think you're right. I think there's culture shock, and it's sort of part of the fun. You get over it, you get used to it, and then you're ready to leave. And then you do leave India, and then about a month later, you are hankering to go back again.
Okay, we can open up. People want to take themselves off mute. And if anybody would like to ask a question, feel free.
It's certainly part of the fun, the excitement.
What about that though?
I think seeing the people and the crowds and the color is part of the fun.
Absolutely. And meeting the people, because they are so warm and interested, and they don't mind getting their picture taken, and they want to engage. It's really cool. It's not like a lot of other places. You know, yeah, it's fun, colorful, inexpensive mostly, and sights you'll never see anywhere else. Yeah. Has anybody here been to India?
Yes, I have.
I thought
loved
maybe you
it.
had. Yeah. Yeah. Had a good time?
Yes, I loved it. I was
Uh-huh.
hoping to go back.
Where did you go?
The north mostly, but it
Northern
was for a
India.
month. So and then down to Bombay.
Uh-huh.
So I was hoping to see the other part of India, but it didn't happen. But the color knocked me out.
The color, see, that was some of the first words Twain said. He'd come from Australia, and he went onward to South Africa, and yeah, the color and the smells and the tastes, the spice, the smoke, the noise,
And
all
the
your senses.
marvelous people.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And the
Uh,
fabric. I have a question. You know, as you were sharing some of those quotes, there were times where I thought, you know, this is bordering on a kind of a social attitude that wouldn't really be acceptable today. And I just wondered, were there parts of his, you know, I've never read those travel publications of his, but were there times when you were uncomfortable? I mean, not putting him in historical context, but where you could kind of, maybe you cringed a little bit at his comments or his, you know, his observations?
Yeah. I mean, somebody said the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there.
Yeah. Yeah. I just didn't know if you made choices.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm not going to put that in.
Oh yeah, I did edit. Yes, I did edit it. And
Yeah.
I did edit out some of the stuff that wouldn't. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did edit. Very lightly edited, but there was one whole section, to tell you the truth, just between you, me, and the other
Yeah.
18 of us. It was. I did knock out one part that was. It was a part about the. Don't worry. Anyway, it was about a
Yeah.
historic event that
As I was
isn't
listening to
looked
your
at the same way today.
which was really interesting about his tours, it reminded me of Dickens. And then I thought, when you read some of his first hyperbole, I thought he's sort of a cross between Dickens and P.T. Barnum.
Yeah, you know, I thought of that. It seems to me it's quite right that he, you know, he clowned around and had fun with some of the stuff he saw in India. And if you take that as an insult, all I can say is he was an equal opportunity insulter. He would say the same thing about Presbyterians or anybody else if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Remember, this is the man who wrote Huckleberry Finn. So you can cite things in the book. For example, he was in New Zealand, where there were Marai, as there are now, the Aboriginal people there. And there was a case of a monument to particularly famous Marais. And they were ones who stood up for the government, which was at the time fighting. You know, it's like an American Indian who was siding with the white men. And he was out, Twain was just livid, just outraged. I mean, you should read, when he gets mad, you should read the kind of things he says. That's not in this book because it was in the New Zealand section, but it does sort of tell you where he was at. Equal opportunity insulter. That's what I say.
I loved your photographs. It was really wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Hi,
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Carly.
yes. Both Gary and I were here. We both have lived in India
Oh,
for from a few months to a year to Gary's an art historian, so he studies the art of India. And I wanted to go back to what you said in the beginning about culture shock. I actually, after living in India for a year, came back, of course, to the United States, and I think how I would describe my feeling that I was in culture shock coming back, because one thing
hmm
traveling and learning about other culture does to you is makes you examine your own culture very in a deeper way. So other people were talking about they weren't that they see a place like India. That's when we talk about, many people talk about being culturally shocked. But I'd like to say that the reverse of that, it can be true if you examine your own, come back and really examine your own culture.
Carly, what was the shock when you came back?
Oh, the way we how we live in such a materialistic society, and how we, I mean, we didn't live in those hotels that you might talk about, even though I've been in some of those. We lived without electricity sometimes, without water, I mean, clean water. So our experience probably isn't like those that go on those tours, you know, and I'm glad I did. But that was one thing, the waste that we have in our country. I wasn't aware of yeah, I think those two things. But then when I came back and I started to think about our culture more, the racism, the white privilege, all of those things surfaced more for me, or my awareness. I don't know how you want to respond to anything.
I've had much the same experience coming back, reverse culture shock. So and exactly the things you said, the waste and the material. I mean, I'm interested. You lived in a place, without electricity or running water. But one thing you kind of find out is you don't really have to have that. There are workarounds. One thing about India, there's a workaround for everything.
Yeah.
It's not, you hear about these people living on $5 or however many dollars a day, but there's a way to do it, and if a lot of it's, I think, their family and their religion and all these things they love to do that don't really require having a lot of money. It's other forms of entertainment. So yeah, I guess I'm agreeing with you. I had the exact same experience.
Right. Twain wasn't in India a very long time.
No, he wasn't.
Was about 3 months?
No, not even
Not
that.
even that,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I think you have to be in a place for a while.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Yeah,
before
he
you-
met a lot of people. I mean, everybody wanted to meet the great Mark Twain.
Yeah,
So a lot of people were showing him around and describing things in a much better way than, any of us could probably get it. And he was, of course, a keen observer, but it was a short time. He was aware of that too. He just noted the things and tried to write an interesting book, which it is.
There's a lot more of India in your pictures than in his book. I mean, you're illustrating a whole lot of things. Things he was saying were like, in his wonderful way of saying
Right.
it, but typical travel writer thinks about what a weird place I've been to.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
This is
Your
exotic
pictures
place.
very much. The Indian image that always strikes me most is, and you've got it in your pictures, the one about the 7 wise men and the elephant, trying to describe the elephant from there, or 7 blind men, I guess it is in the
Yeah.
elephant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Because there are so many Indias and there's so many Americas, and
that's right.
but so
Yes.
many of those are so different than ours. They're wonderful to see. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Many countries, millions of gods, dozens of languages, hundreds of cultures. Yeah, it's a lot there.
I don't think we really understand how many gods they have, because religion is less of a thing, less of an issue in America, certainly around the North. And Hindu gods everywhere is so different. They're really sort of helpers, genuinely with you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
What brought you back to India after the first time?
Well, let's see. The second time was 84. And
Because you didn't like India the first time, so why did you go back?
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, why didn't I was interested, I guess. What can I say? The most psychedelic,
Something drew
colorful,
you.
fascinating place I'd ever been. And by the way, the second time it was not just India, but it was like Twain. It was a world tour
Right.
that went all the way around the world. And it just came to me. I decided to do that. I can't describe the motives very well.
But you went
Curiosity,
back. You went
need
back.
for adventure, and being young.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock and we have a few more minutes. Is any final questions someone has? Diana, did you raise your hand? You can unmute.
Muted, Diana.
Diana, you-
Unmute. Unmute.
Diana, you're on mute.
Okay. I love to travel, but I've always been afraid to go to India because I've heard so much about the extreme poverty. And that's really kind of what has scared me off. Can you say anything about how that struck you, and how did you get such gorgeous photographs when it doesn't, they're fantastic. Anyway, thank you for that.
So yeah, I mean, it is shock. I guess with the poverty, yeah, I kind of knew that was true. You've always heard it, and I'm sure you're aware that something like half the world lives on $5 a day or less.
Right.
And I felt I had to see that. No, I mean, it's not nice. But it's an education. I guess it's educational.
Let me
It's
offer you something
educational.
my son told us. He lives in Delhi.
Yes.
Most of the
yeah, we
time.
have grandchildren in India.
India, people talk about India being a poor country. India isn't a poor country. It's one of the richest countries in the world. It's the 7th largest industrial nation. His point was that, as he said, India is a very rich country. It just has a lot of poor people.
Yep.
And then the point is, if you got to the United States and you started on the south side of Chicago, or you went into rural Western Massachusetts, you'd find a lot of very impoverished people. We tend to avoid them. There are parts of New York City you don't go to, parts of Hartford you don't go to, parts of
Yes.
Boston you don't dare go to. I mean, the fact is we avoid those things, and in India, they're there, and there's more of them because there are more of them.
Yeah.
But the poverty, you don't have to be in the poverty. You can see all kinds of middle-class things there too. But
And
it's a
more
hard
and more
country.
every day,
It's a
by
hard
the way,
country to travel to, yeah.
we should make the point that every single day, probably 100,000 people or more leave extreme poverty. If you look at all the graphs of the poverty, just since 1973, my first trip there, the rate of poverty, global poverty, is much lower than it ever was. Every day it gets to be less. Same with literacy. When I first went there, maybe 5 to 10% of the women could read. Now, if you take the children under like 25 years old, 90% of them can read in India. And that's true. That same trend is all over the world, China too, everywhere. So, if that softens the blow of the poverty a little bit, there's a fact. There's a factoid.
Yeah, I think in India, it's clear that poor people don't have as many things as we do, and they don't need them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they bathe at the pump,
Mm-hmm.
whereas we have to have tubs and bathrooms and all that. So there's so many things that they don't have and don't need or don't use, or, their life doesn't revolve around it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need a whole lot of clothes. They have their one outfit.
Yep. Yep.
And they seem to, they manage quite well that way.
Yeah.
So it just isn't the same kind of, they don't have cars, they walk.
Mm-hmm. And they don't seem to be bitter by and large
Yes,
about being in the lower half of
right.
the income range. Yeah.
Well, we have time for, looking at the clock, we have time for one more question, and then we'll.
I'll wrap it up with one more quote
Wrap it up.
after the questions are done, okay?
Okay,
Hello?
yeah, okay, Ellen, go ahead. Last question.
Yeah, hi.
Comment.
I just wanted to point out that in the South, in Tamil Nadu, it's almost 100% literacy is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And that's one of the more socialistic
Yep.
states.
Yep. Kerala
And
too.
they highly value education down there. And they have an incredibly, like I said, probably 90, almost 100% literacy in that state.
Mm-hmm.
Kerala also is very
Yeah,
high.
Kerala. Yep. Yep. Same thing.
Okay,
Okay.
Will, you
One
wanna-
last.
one-
Let me
okay,
just show
one
you one
last.
last thing here, which is sort of amusing. Because here's saying, I believe that in India, cold weather is merely a conventional phrase and has come into use through the necessity of having some way to distinguish between weather which will melt a brass doorknob and weather which will only make it mushy. When a person is accustomed to 138 in the shade, his ideas about cold weather are not valuable. And so this is a picture, this is in Patna in north central India. It's just down the street. And here are these people bundled up around a campfire on the street, just burning, I don't know what, and trying to get warm. Well, I looked it up afterwards. The low temperature that day, the low, mind you, was 73 degrees Fahrenheit.
So funny.
Well, William, thank you so much for coming and doing
Thank
your
you so
presentation.
much.
Your pictures were beautiful. The quotes were great. And we greatly appreciate you doing this for us.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you.
I,
you.
very, very enjoyable.
And don't forget, you can get his book at the website.
Amazon too.
And
Makes a
at
great-
Amazon.
Yep, makes a great gift.
William.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.